You are listening to the Kelly Confidential podcast with Kelly Wilkes. This is episode 7. Welcome to the Kelly Confidential show, where we talk negotiation essentials and those crucial conversations empowering extraordinary women. Real women, real issues. Let's jump in. Hey, hello friends. I'm really excited to share with you today's episode because it's actually one segment of a 2-part series showcasing the life and career of my friend and mentor, really, Monica Hanaway, psychotherapist, mediator, lecturer, author, and an expert in existential leadership. And why do you need to know about Monica? Well, perhaps it's the fact that she's dedicated her career to helping others navigate conflict, including leading some very complex cases like gender-based violence in South Africa, to mediating with Irish paramilitary loyalists at the request of the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu, whom she was able to call a personal friend. Part 1 focuses on Monica's career and key crossroads that took her from being a conventional art student to becoming an international expert in mediation. And Part 2, which will air a few days later, focuses particularly on existential leadership, and her book, The Existential Leader, which I believe is one of the best books I've read thus far on what it means to be a leader in a post-COVID corporate world. But don't take my word for it. Let's listen in. I'm delighted to introduce my guest today, Monica Hanaway. I first met Monica in 2016. when I attended the mediation accreditation course at Regents College, now Regents University, where she co-facilitated the program with the late Paul Randolph. I remember that week as being so exciting, intimidating, and energizing. And I remember feeling very safe with Monica and that she knew so much. And the 2 impressions I was left with at the end of that program were the story about a mediation with gang members and a missing laptop, one I hope she will share with us today, and that she was a people whisperer. Monica can put anyone at ease in ways rarely experienced. She can get you to open up and share deeply and authentically in a way that feels so cathartic and honest. And she's someone that you just want to spend time with. So it's little wonder that she's been so successful in her career. Let me tell you a little bit about that. Monica is an accredited mediator, psychotherapist, and clinical supervisor. She's a leadership executive and business coach and trainer. She is also a senior lecturer for the accredited mediation course hosted annually now at Jesus College at Oxford University, a program which she co-managed for years when it was held at Regents University London, as I've mentioned. And if that's not enough, Monica is a wonderful writer and author of 6 books, all of which you can access from the show notes. And she's a wife, mother, and grandmother. Welcome, Monica.
Thank you very much, Kelly, for inviting me to join you today. It's a really exciting series, and I feel very pleased to be part of it and to share my journey and just my thoughts with everybody.
Well, thank you for being on the show. Full disclosure, I've known you for those, going on 7 years now.
Yeah.
And we have met several times over those 7 years. I've attended a number of your courses, and I'm delighted that I've been able to support you on the mediation accreditation that's now hosted each year at Oxford.
Yeah, it's been wonderful to have you on that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm really looking forward to today's session because we're going to learn a bit more about you and what I think is a remarkable journey that you've been on to where you're at now, particularly in your professional career. And also just really introducing existentialism to our listeners and what existential leadership looks like. It's something that we live and breathe, particularly in the corporate world, but so many people don't realize
Yes.
how it's operating around them and how they interoperate with it. But before we get to that, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you and your early years. And if you can tell us a little bit about how you grew up, where you came from, and your choices as you started your education.
Thank you. Well, I was born in Manchester. My dad was a production manager in a factory, and my mum worked for the Co-op funeral service, which is perhaps significant because she was on reception, and so she was very good at meeting people in times of distress. And our home was very often full of people who my mum would take in when they were in distress. So pregnant girls who were thrown out of their home might turn up and be with us for a while. I had both my grandmother and grandfather living in the house at different times. So it was very much small family, happy, and kind of open to others as well. So it was a good time. I was quite tomboyish. I spent most of my time outside with the boys in the street, exploring areas around, climbing trees, making things. And very much a sense of being able to be who I was. I think partly because it had taken my parents 10 years to have a child. So that when I was born, it wasn't like, oh, we have a daughter. It's we have a child that we've longed for. And so I didn't feel any gender restrictions in that. There wasn't any expectations. Whatever I was interested in, they were happy to kind of facilitate that.
Yeah. So. And what were your interests as you were growing up? I know art was an interest of yours. How did you kind of chart your path into college and university? What choices were you considering, and where did you end up?
Okay. I passed what's called the 11 plus, which is an entrance exam for grammar schools at the time. And so I went to a convent grammar school, Roman Catholic convent grammar school for girls, where I did not shine, I would say. It was the kind of
shine.
No, there were some very clever girls and young women there, but it was the ethos was that you were being prepared for an independent life. So the nuns and the teachers who weren't nuns tended to be single women, quite career orientated. So there was never a sense that you're being trained up to be a wife or mother. That was never part of the agenda at all. But equally, the expectations career-wise were very low.
Okay.
So the school, nobody went to Oxford or Cambridge. They wouldn't think of putting anybody in for those kind of universities.
Okay.
For the nuns, really, they were training you up to either be a nun or a teacher.
Wow. Gosh, what a narrow view for women.
It was a very narrow view, and looking back, I didn't feel particularly bright or intelligent or anything of those things, and realise now that actually we were probably quite a bright bunch of young women by the time we got to sixth form, but with limited expectations. The expectation of the school was that I would go to university, probably study English and then teach.
Okay.
I decided that I wanted to try art, and this was seen as quite a negative thing by the school, a waste, and also quite a dangerous thing. It was like,
dangerous.
You're going to be with all these wild bohemian people, and therefore we'll pray for you.
Oh my goodness!
So there I did go to study fine art, and it was. I'm glad I did. I think there's a lot of truth in that it doesn't really fit you for very much in terms of career. But it was 3 years to explore who you were. You know, we had lectures from people like George Mellet, who was a jazz person, and it was a very interesting space to be with some interesting people. The odd thing that's happened, this kind of thing that doesn't happen to most people, is that I got married. So very early.
How old were you when you got married?
20. And that was to somebody who was at the university and who was deemed to be extremely clever, and certainly was very intellectually interesting to be with. We got married, I think, because we were both from Catholic families, and way back then it was not the done thing to live together. So it just kind of took its course. I knew we went to Denmark about a month before we got married, and I thought, this is not really the right thing to be doing.
Wow. So you knew before you got married that
I think so.
In your gut instinct, it wasn't the one.
It wasn't really the right thing to do, but it felt almost inevitable. And I had great admiration for him at that time. He had lots of ambitions to write. He wrote poetry. He was a photographer, very much a stereotypical sort of Irish creative drinker. So there were some interesting times and some very challenging times. I tended to have to play kind of host to his intellectual group of men, really. And as I was listening to them, I kind of realised that maybe I knew as much as them. Maybe I might even have more to offer. And that wasn't a relationship to stay in. I certainly never wanted children within that relationship. And I actually moved with him to Somerset because he had a job there, which he very quickly got bored with and left. And so I ended up as the breadwinner, getting whatever job I could, which was as a social worker. So I got my art degree, but the only thing going in the place we went was that. I became fascinated with the people I met.
And what a fortuitous sort of period in your life, because look how it's turned out. It
changed my direction. I taught. I should have said that when you've got a degree in fine art, the next thing you do usually is do a postgrad teaching course, because that's probably the only which I did, and I taught in a very challenging school. And because art is such an intimate thing, I was learning more about other people's lives, the challenges they had, and it felt I didn't want to carry on teaching because, if people were being abused at home, expecting them to do homework, etc., just didn't seem a priority. So moving into social work, although it was just opportune that there was an advert in the paper for that, it did follow on from a change in interest much more to the interpersonal that came about during my teacher training.
And so I can feel myself getting excited listening to this, because it's just at the cusp of what became such a profound career choice. So what happened then, both in your career development, which was still in its sort of infancy at that stage, and also your personal life, because there were some cross sections starting there, weren't there?
Yeah, there were. And I've never had a kind of goal, a career goal at all. I kind of follow where my path takes me, which you can already see starting, really. And so I saw an advert for a job which was away from where we were living, so it was in Cheltenham. And it was for somebody to co-create a programme for 13 to 19-year-olds who had to drop out of school. And the reasons were many. I mean, some because they had committed offences and had been institutionalised. Some was illness. Some was all sorts of different things. And it was a new course. It didn't exist. And it was run within a college, St Paul's College, as it was then in Cheltenham, which was an all-male college.
All right.
And it was an all-male college where you could study double PE, physical education.
Really?
So you could, yes. So you can imagine the kind of cohort that it attracted.
Yes.
So I went. I got that post. And worked with a very nice guy there to set it up and to run it. And we took in 30 young people each year for a year at a time. And it was absolutely fabulous work. I loved it. It also included taking them to the college discos, so people in wheelchairs, so dancing with them in their wheelchairs, helping them to get social confidence, to understand themselves.
So critical.
It was funded.
So critical in those formative years, really pre-adulthood.
Yeah, and some amazing stories. I mean, we had one boy on the course, he'd be 18, and his note said, he's not really responsive. If you speak to him, he says something completely mad and off the wall, and he's a clown. And I said something to him one day, and he replied, and I suddenly thought, did he mishear me? Because the answer I got back made a lot of sense if you'd slightly misheard what I said. So I sent him to be tested, and it turned out he was almost completely deaf.
Oh my goodness.
He'd gone through the whole school system, just being seen as, well, he was part Italian, so they either said, it's not his real language, or, he's just a troublemaker. It was a delightful young man.
That's
delightful.
terrible that you suffered so long up to that point, but thank God you had the foresight to have him tested.
Yeah. So I'd be mid-20s at this point.
Okay.
And I was also the college warden. So for all those doing their teacher training who were probably 2 years younger than I was. So that was quite challenging as a young woman, because you're surrounded by all these young men who didn't really understand what my role was. And one of my roles was supposed to go round at night, make sure they'd not got women in their rooms and
really
serve them out, which I never did.
Lord.
I have to say.
That's a conversation we're going to have to pick up another time, so I can.
There are many
so I can hear all those stories.
Yes.
You must have been hugely unpopular.
Not really, because I didn't do the things I was supposed to be doing. But it was a wonderful 3 years. The course was sponsored by Exeter University on the understanding that I would look at whether or not you can bring a reflective element into how we live in that age group.
Okay.
And then write it up. So it's actually for the theology department.
Really?
Yeah.
When you say reflective element, what do you mean?
For them to stop and understand, it's actually very existential without anybody ever using the word, but for them to stop and consider their worldview, who they were, where they had freedoms, where they had responsibilities. We had one young woman, unfortunately, die. She was a drug user and she died with hepatitis. So you were looking at issues of life and death. And a lot of, although we had to do some educational work, it was much more a kind of group philosophical exploration with those young people.
Okay.
All of whom, I think pretty much all of them went into work at the end of the year, some sort.
Wow.
So it was great, but it was difficult on a personal level because the funding was annually.
Okay.
So from Easter, I wouldn't know whether I would still be in work in the September, so I had to start applying for other jobs.
Okay.
And we never knew about funding. So I saw a job advertised in Oxford, which was to work on the streets with young homeless people. And I applied for that. It was a permanent post.
Sounds like an easy walk in the park job.
Well, I remember thinking, I'll give myself a month, and if no young person has spoken to me, then I'll find something else.
Yeah.
Because it was literally going and sitting with groups of young people where they hung out and talking to them.
Yeah. But so intimidating, I think, because presumably it's at night, some of it.
Day and night. Yeah.
And it would be, I think it would be intimidating not knowing what to expect, as doing this for the first time and what, what state they might be in and was the aim to get them into a shelter or?
No, I mean, some were using shelters, some were in care, but didn't, it was a real mix of people. The aim was to be there for them.
Okay.
So they could talk to me, and I could help them with whatever they brought. So it wasn't that there was an external agenda.
Okay.
It was actually building trust with an adult, and that they could bring whatever they brought to that relationship. And I worked with a co-worker, a man, Ian. We didn't stick together necessarily, but we were both working.
And how long did you do that? And what did that spark in you in terms of your next step? Because you're in Oxford at this point.
Yeah, I did that for 5 years.
Wow.
And by that time, I was divorced, I was remarried, and I had my first baby.
Okay, we need to go back to that. That's a lot. Wow, that's a lot in 5 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's pause, and I want to just talk for a moment about Byrne and how you met him and the beginning of that relationship, which has been an unconventional relationship in many respects, in how you guys have worked together and in channeling the careers in the household and raising children.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about
well, we're going back to Cheltenham, by which time I'd left my first marriage. And I met Byrne in a very, very unconventional way in that I'm a bit of a workaholic, I have to admit to that. So in the college holidays, I still had to be on campus for various reasons. But I would get bored, so I thought, what can I do? And they were looking for somebody to run an English language course for short courses for people visiting. And tourists? So I was doing... Sorry?
Like tourists, or when you say people visiting?
Young people who would come for 4 weeks or something.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And one of the people who came to work on that course, Jane, she said to me once, I've got this guy coming over at the weekend, and I think he fancies me, but I don't really fancy him. can you be a chaperone? Kind of. Can we meet at your flat? Because I had a wonderful flat then, which belonged to the college, because I was the college warden. So I said, fine. As it turns out, the guy wasn't particularly interested in her. I thought she was interested in him. So he brought a chaperone with him.
So he brought a chaperone.
Which was Bern.
Ah.
So I met Bern on my own doorstep, in the sense that I opened the door expecting one person, and there were two guys, both wearing red noses, on my doorstep.
What was the...
It was Red Nose Day.
It was, okay, wow, sorry. How funny.
Yes. So, yeah, so the two chaperones liked one another. And that's the beginning of that story.
Well, and beginning of a permanent chapter in your life. Mm-hmm. And tell us a little bit about how your partnership with Bern has allowed your career to blossom in the ways that it has, and also your choices in expanding your family. You've got two daughters. Tell us a little bit about how that all evolved.
I mean, Bernie's a very, very special person. He's a very quiet person, quite shy, extremely creative, both musically and artistically. All of those things really appeal to me a lot. He has no interest in 9-to-5 work or ambitions within the kind of corporate world or anything. And meeting him opened up for me a different possibility about motherhood as well, because I wanted to continue working. I get a lot out of the work I do always, and I'd never been able to see how that could be compatible with being a mum in the way I'd like to be a mum. Mm-hmm. So Bern was working for a housing aid organisation, and we talked about having children. We got married. Can't quite remember how we got married, but we did. We had a very small wedding. And we decided we'd like to have children, and he said he would be really happy to be at home teaching children, painting with them, teaching them music, etc. So he gave his job up when I became pregnant with our first daughter, who I'm immensely proud of. She's a lecturer now and an expert in James Joyce's Ulysses, and a very amazing young woman who now has 2 children of her own. And we went on to have my second daughter, who again I'm immensely proud of. She's a brilliant woman, film producer, very feisty, amazing women. We are both incredibly proud of them. Yeah. And they had a growing up with the dad where they had their toolboxes. So he built theatre sets and things. They would help. They would go to theatres with it. They had an unconventional childhood, but a fun one. Yeah. We travelled. We took them on holiday from being very young, so they know Italy very well. And they would take their sketchbooks and, so really very lovely memories of them growing up. And now really exciting about the fact that they teach me things now and bring new things to me and to their dad. So very, very, very lucky to have met Bern and to have been able to have that kind of family life. Mm-hmm.
And was it in that period you at one point took a corporate role?
Yeah, I mean through the work that I did with the young people, I kept being asked to do more strategic things, more policy-based things, worked on police consultative committees, worked on a number of things. And so I was given really a very high-level post, which was strategic and policy, which I did for far too many years. It was... I have to be careful, and Bern's really good at helping me reframe this at times, because I can sometimes say it was a waste, those years. In fact, it wasn't. I set up a women's information centre. I set up youth counselling services. They've all gone. They don't exist, because when I stepped away from that work, the funding went as well. But it was a time when I felt it was a fight all the time, because people see you when you've got a budget and authority as being able to do things that you can't do, because everything has to go through committees and boards. So it was very frustrating. It was also a time when I saw things that I was very uncomfortable with in terms of practice. Some really important things as well, political, which I chose to speak out about. And my working life was made extremely uncomfortable because of that. Throughout the time I was working there, I'd done a second master's course, because we've not really talked about the psychotherapy and all the rest of it, but the psychotherapy, I started my training when I was working as a social worker back in Somerset. By doing counselling and then a degree. Trained analytically, so because I was very naive and thought, if you want to be a therapist, it has to be a Freudian analysis training. So I trained as an analyst, which is another story, because that's very... my experience of it was very much about power dynamics and gender, in that I was told, your customers really are likely to be middle-aged women, and you keep them in therapy for at least 7 years.
Wow.
And that was by the men who were teaching me. But
It's extraordinary.
I did that training, and then I did existential training. But and all of this I was doing alongside full-time jobs. And so I was doing a second degree.
Can I ask? I'm just connecting some of the important life events in your career leading up to where you're at now. And I know we're going to talk about existentialism here in a moment. At what point, when you were learning about existentialism, were you still in your corporate role?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So say a little bit more about that, and I know you're limited in what you can share. Yeah. So I won't take you into any areas that you can't, but you made some really important life decisions about that corporate role. And I'm wondering how your existential teachings maybe informed some of that.
Yeah. I was doing my existential training at the same time as I was in that corporate role at the beginning. The good thing about that role was that they did encourage self-development. They did encourage you to take other courses and would give you some time to do that. So that's really positive.
Yeah.
Because I trained analytically first, so I had my existential practice before I went into that corporate role.
Okay.
Actually. But doing that 2 evenings a week.
Okay.
And made sometimes at the weekend. I have to say that it was a difficult job. It was a high level job, but I didn't find it difficult. And I got very bored because I could do everything very quickly. So I would always be doing something alongside that was taking me in the direction of leaving and of moving much more into the therapy and the existential world.
Practice. And
and at the same time struggling existentially with authenticity. Because I was in a role that encouraged you not to be authentic. If people asked you a question, you were meant to give the party line on it and not answer it. You were not meant to speak out against what you didn't fit your values and belief systems. And if you did, it was dangerous to do so. So it was towards the end of that, it was probably the most uncomfortable time in my life, because I also felt a lot of responsibility to the people who were working directly to me, who were also uncomfortable with what was going on. And I remember saying to them that I felt like I was walking a tightrope. And that if you look at bamboo, it doesn't break because it flexes, it moves to one side with the wind, and that I was on this tightrope like a piece of bamboo, sort of trying to just move with the flow. And I said to them, if I feel that I'm going to break, rather than I can't flex anymore, I'm going to get off the tightrope and go, which is what I did. And I did feel that I was letting them down.
I can understand that feeling.
I also, in all honesty, felt let down by some of them, because I'd fought a fight which was our fight and I'd seen it, but because of a lot of fear, which I could understand, it did feel like suddenly I was on my own.
That's in everything you've just said in the last couple of minutes, the overwhelming feeling I'm left with is isolation. Can I just?
I was so fortunate because I'd got Bert, who was extremely good at saying, you've got to take care of yourself as well, and if that means giving up an extremely well-paid job with a lot of security, when we've got mortgage and 2 children and he's not an earner, we will manage. We will do it. We will get there somehow, because the girls were small at that age.
We're going to pause there for this first part of our interview with Monica Hanaway. If you enjoy what you've heard, please be sure to join us for part 2 of this session, where we explore why so many people are talking about existentialism in post-COVID business. And Monica breaks down what it really means to be a 21st century leader. And it's not what you think. Until then,